Good morning, friends. My name is Delano Roosevelt. I am the President and CEO of the National Council on U.S. Arab Relations. We have a particularly exciting group today that we've put together for your pleasure and your education and to raise your awareness on things happening in the Middle East. Today's subject is going to be the U.S. Yemen case study in safeguarding antiquities and cultural heritage amid the conflicts currently happening in the Middle East, specifically with regard to Yemen. The National Council on U.S. Arab Relations has been around for coming up on our 41st year. We are very excited about being able to bring you these wide and varied subjects for you. And we are blessed that we seem to always attract wonderful people, the best in their fields with respect to the subject matter that we are presenting on any given event. So today's event, there's so much good material here and so much good information. Let's get right to it. And I would like to very much introduce Dr. Abdurrahim Fukara, who will be our master of ceremonies, if you will, and he'll make the introductions of our esteemed guests, and we'll get right into it. Dr. Abdurrahim, the floor, sir, is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Roosevelt, President of the National Council on U.S. Arab Relations, and welcome everybody to this National Council on U.S. Arab Relations webinar. As you heard a little while ago, it's about U.S. Yemen. It's a U.S. Yemen case study in safeguarding antiquities and cultural heritage amidst conflict, explaining successful collaboration in the protection and preservation of Yemen's cultural heritage. My name, as you heard a little while ago, is Abdurrahim Fukara. I'm the Bureau Chief Al Jazeera in North and South America. And it is a real privilege for me to moderate this very, very, very important conversation on the looting and preservation of Yemen's heritage. A real privilege because the speakers are of vital relevance to this subject. And it is a real privilege because we will be talking about Yemen, a country at the heart of Arab and human civilization at large. In the words of Mr. Tim Lenderking, the U.S. envoy to Yemen, will be part of this conversation. People in the U.S. and everywhere else need to know that Yemen is more than just war and its concomitant misery. Yemen has given so much to human civilization throughout its very, very, very long history indeed. So in addition to Mr. Lenderking, the other vitally relevant participants in this conversation are His Excellency Ambassador Mohammed Hadrami. He's the ambassador of the Republic of Yemen to the United States. Ms. Tess Davis, the executive director of the Antiquities Coalition. Dr. Jeremy Chitikate, who is a research fellow at the French National Center for Scientific Research and a visiting research scholar at the New York University Institute for the Study of the Ancient World. Each speaker will present for about 10 minutes before we open the conversation to a Q&A. But if you'll allow me, before we start this conversation, I would like to say that this is the first conversation I'm moderating with the National Council on U.S. Arab Relations since Mr. H. Delano Roosevelt, the grandson of President Franklin Delano, became the Council's president and CEO. I would also like to give a quick shout out to Dr. John Duke Anthony, who had served for decades as founding president and CEO of the council. I have enormous respect and appreciation for him also. And a shout out to the council's staff in general, but in particular, as far as I'm concerned for this particular occasion, to the executive vice president, Pat Mancino, for everything he's done to organize this webinar and to invite me to moderate it. So let's get down to it. And I would like to start with the Ambassador Hadrami. Ambassador, obviously, we will talk about the challenges, but also the opportunities. But let's start with the challenges. What is the size of the problem that we're talking about here?
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank the U.S. Arab Relations Council for having us here today. I think it's a very important subject, and I'm really happy to be part of it. And also, I'm really glad to be part of the panel with Mr. Linder King, Davis, and Dr. Jeremy, who we know each other from previous events. And I'm really happy that the subject is the focus for today's event. You know, you asked a very important question. You know, preserving heritage, any country's heritage, should be a priority for every country. But a country in the midst of conflict, like in Yemen, it becomes very hard to achieve that goal. You know, after the Houthis terrorist coup in 2014, we, the government, found ourselves in a very peculiar position to where we need our priorities to be preserving lives and livelihoods of our people, but also having seen the pillage of our heritage, we decided also to do something about our preserving our heritage. But as any country in conflict, we face major, huge challenges. You know, you see, when you're trying to preserve your heritage, you look at your home front, right? I mean, you need to increase the security apparatus, clearing sites, trying to prevent profiteering and looting of your antiquities. But at the same time, you need to look at the market front, which is you know, Europe and the United States and what have we. And I think for us right now, we decided, especially here at the embassy, to focus on the market front. And we wouldn't have been able to do it alone. I mean, since 2018, and I'm happy Mrs. Tess Davis is here with us today, we've been blessed with such good friends. Antiquities Coalition's helped us navigate this treacherous road from the beginning. And of course, without the U.S. government support, we wouldn't have been able to do much. I could go on into details on how we went through the steps towards protecting and preserving our heritage, specifically here in the United States. But I would leave it to you, Dr. Abdul Rahim, to let me know where you wanted to focus.
You probably have another 5 minutes if you choose to continue to elaborate a little bit on the general frame of both the problem and the opportunity. Yeah.
So at the beginning of 2018, here at the embassy and also back home with the help of Antiquities Coalition, we thought that if we cannot do much at home because of the war, let's try to prevent the smuggling to the biggest market in arts, which is the United States. And then when we decided to do so, we learned the hard way that it's not easy. You know, we looked at examples of Iraq and others who were successful. So we started back in 2019 with the help of Antiquities Coalition into collecting this big, huge list. It's a list that put auction houses and others on notice, just telling them these are stolen goods. Please do not proceed in actually acquiring them or putting them in your collections. And that in itself, in a way, kind of helped for the beginning. But then we moved on to have or work to get the U.S. government's import restrictions. And that in itself, we needed the help of the Treasury and State Department, and I thank everybody who helped us along the way. But then we discovered that we needed to accede to the UNESCO conventions of 1970, and we're at war. We're a signatory of that convention since so many years back, but we haven't ratified it. So back in 2019 and 20, we made it a priority, even though we had this huge humanitarian catastrophe because of the Houthis coup, to actually go in and have a presidential decree to ratify that agreement, so we could actually approach the United States formally to have this import restrictions happening. And it did happen back early 2020. And that was a very huge step. After that, we were approached by the DHS, the Department of Homeland Security. We acquired 76 stolen items that were retrieved by the United States. That was the huge, biggest, fruit that we got after the years of preparation and help from the United States. But then we were faced with a dilemma. I mean, what would we do with these precious artifacts? Do we send them back home? Were we still fighting the Houthis? Would we still really struggle into not only just protecting our heritage, but also the lives and livelihoods of so many people? And we decided, with the help of the State Department, to approach leading cultural institutions. And we were happy to start with the Smithsonian institution here in DC. We went there just a few months after we received the word from DHS that we were receiving 67 items, and we got so much support from the Smithsonian. And now they host 79 of our items. 76 were actually repatriated back in February 2023, and 3 added in April 2023. And you can see that 2023, we had so much done, but without the work, dedication, and the help from Antiquities Coalition, from the State Department, from DHS, throughout the years since 2018, we wouldn't be able to do so much in 2023 and 2024. With the help of the Smithsonians, we got connected to the Metropolitan Museum, and just in September, we added 2 items that the Metropolitan Museum discovered in the collections that they belong to Yemen, and they were actually looted back in the days. And they decided, with their initiative, to return them to the Yemeni people. So we actually replicated the agreement that we did with the Smithsonian, and we put it with the Metropolitan. We had a very good ceremony there back in 2023. And the good thing is, when we approached this, our aim was twofold. One was raising awareness of the looting and pillage that is happening in Yemen. And second, it was just to find a safekeeping place, like protecting these items until it's safe to get it back home. But what we discovered is, when you have these partnerships with these leading institutions, you get more than that. And I'm really happy to say that we got more than just a place to keep our precious items. We did a very important and very important informative event in the Smithsonian just earlier this year, and we just last week had a very nice and very informative event with the Yemeni community in the Metropolitan Museum. So it all started with the partnership to keeping our items safe, but then it ended up to promoting the heritage of Yemen, the folklore, the dances, the music. I mean, we had such a beautiful event in the Metropolitan just last week, and Mr. Linder King was part of it. It's the same as the event that we had in the Smithsonian. And I could see that this partnership would guide us to the future, even when we eventually reinstate state institutions back home. I think the journey between us and these institutions will continue, because we want to share our art, our culture, with not just institutions, but also with all the art-loving billions of people who roam the museums here in the United States. And that's a good thing. And I think also, just as a final thought, it does, success and good planning begets success and good planning in the future. And I think I would encourage all institutions, auctioneers, private collectors, to follow suit in the steps of the Metropolitan and the Smithsonian. And we do have success stories. I mean, we're in the process of repatriating another item from New York as we speak, and we are in the process of repatriating another 15 items coming from New Zealand soon. And hopefully within a few months, we'll have another ceremony in New York or here in DC, and then we'll just continue the success of the story that we started back in 2018. Back to you.
Ambassador Hadrami, thank you very much. Let me go over now to Mr. Tim Lenderking, the U.S. envoy to Yemen. Mr. Lenderking, you have about 10 minutes. Could you take us into your thoughts and feelings about this issue of antiquities and the looting of antiquities, Yemeni antiquities, both as an American citizen, but also as a U.S. envoy to Yemen?
Yes, I would be glad to. So delighted to be with all of you this morning to serve on this terrific panel. Anytime I can join Del Roosevelt, I'm a happy guy, and same with the ambassador, who really deserves to be singled out for his commitment that he himself is demonstrating, I think, to making things happen and building up preservation of Yemen's antiquities, because it is an issue, I think, that cuts across all political parties and persuasions in Yemen. This is the cultural heritage of the Yemeni people, their history. And I think, Abdurrahim, just as you, thank you so much for moderating today, just as I think you mentioned, the opportunity to preserve, but also to show the real face of Yemen to the world, which gets forgotten in the context of current events and fighting and negotiations and warfare and so forth. But this is a very rich country, and it's a distinct country. It has distinct countries as neighbors, also Oman and Saudi Arabia. But Yemen's history is special. It's unique, and it whether it's the antiquities, the language, the history, the monuments still standing out there, the Marab Dam and other, the skyscrapers in Siham. I mean, these are incredible relics and reminders of a rich past. So the chance to go and spend time in Yemen is something that I think we all value. I am able to go as the U.S. envoy from time to time in the context of trying to resolve the ongoing conflict. But I truly look forward to the day when I could do what Jeremy and I'm sure Tess have done over the years, spend time out there with the antiquities and get away from sort of the beaten track a little bit, because it is a beautiful country as well. And I think, we're in my office, we're never far from the fact that we're working on behalf of a real cultural, powerhouse here, and that we want to see Yemen get back on its feet, return to peace. And in that vein, let me just say, I think a lot has been accomplished in the last couple of years, and I'm very grateful that the U.S. administration, President Biden and Secretary Blinken have, really prioritized ending the Yemen conflict, because I think the U.S. contribution has been essential and vital to the preservation, the establishment, and then the preservation of a truce in Yemen, which has largely ended the fighting inside and brought, some degree of solace and peace to many Yemenis. But of course, it's an unfinished work, and one cannot be satisfied with the progress knowing that there's still no durable ceasefire and there's no Yemeni political dialogue, which I think we're so keen to establish. That in our view is the way forward, and I think there's an international consensus about that. There is no military solution to this conflict. That has been tried. All sides that have tried to impose a military victory on Yemen have failed to do so. And there's absolutely no reason to subject the Yemeni people to more fighting and bloodshed and destruction, which is not only the destruction of their artifacts and their history, but of the daily infrastructure that Yemenis need to, to go about their business, to feed their families, to be able to travel, to be able to move around the countries, to be able to till the fields and bring in their catch from the Red Sea. So I feel like there really is a fundamental connection between this peace effort and the Antiquities effort. And I'm so glad, so grateful that big institutions, not only in the United States, but in the world, the Smithsonian, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, are really so dedicated to this effort, and is bringing many institutions across the U.S. government into this field with the great cooperation of Homeland Security, the Department of State, Tess Davis's work with the Antiquities Coalition to draw these folks together, the Department of Treasury, and through the signing of memorandum of understanding, creating avenues and sort of legal requirements on cultural preservation. It is not legal to continue to traffic in artifacts, whether they be from Yemen or other countries. And it's such an important movement. I see it happening in other countries, and I'm so glad to be part of it and to use our efforts as part of, helping to bring peace to Yemen, to have this cultural immersion as well. And of course, this administration remains fundamentally dedicated to a peace process in Yemen. We will not stop. We will not rest our efforts until we get to that durable ceasefire and see a situation where Yemenis from the different persuasions could get around the peace table together. I think we all have confidence that when that moment happens, the Yemenis can take it from there. They don't need Saudi Arabia and the UAE and the United States and, the Security Council to, dictate how Yemen's going to look in the future. That's for Yemenis to decide, and we on the American side are so keen to get back to that effort, which unfortunately has been, significantly disrupted by the Houthis and their attacks on the Red Sea, which are really out of sync, really, with the peace effort, because what they've done essentially is create, more hardship for Yemen in terms of shipping and imposing difficulties on the fishing industry and the ability to move goods to and from Yemen, admittedly for a noble cause, right? I mean, there is a tragedy in Gaza, and we all understand that. And I think we all must, dedicate ourselves to improving that situation as well, which is a horrible one. And I know that the Secretary of State is in Riyadh and Amman, Jordan, and Israel this week, working on the Gaza ceasefire and the hostage release, but that conflict should not set Yemen back, and that's what's happening. Unfortunately, is that so many people have rallied to the cause of Gaza, which is understandable. But what we don't want to see a situation where Yemen gets left behind, and so pushing on our peace efforts must go forward. We must find ways to de-escalate and convince the Houthis that there are other ways, more effective ways, to demonstrate their solidarity with Palestinians, other than by attacking, ships passing through the Red Sea, which are bringing food, medicine, fuel to people all around the world, right? These aren't going to the Israelis necessarily. I mean, these are going to people in India and in Yemen and in Ethiopia who are all suffering, frankly, as a result of the attack on these various attacks on shipping. The Houthis have sunk a ship. They've caused an oil slick. They have killed mariners, innocent mariners. They have hijacked and held 25 innocent sailors from 5 different countries. Still won't let them go. Barely allowing them phone calls with their families. I mean, this is not acceptable behavior. So our dedication and our commitment is to getting back to the peace process as quickly as we can, working with our friends and allies in the region, Oman, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, the government of Yemen, and bringing all Yemeni parties together in a genuine peace effort that is under the umbrella of the United Nations. Let's get there, and let's keep moving forward. But again, delighted to be here and to share what I think is a very positive story on preserving Yemen's antiquities. That's a huge movement, and we're just glad to be part of it and to help as the U.S. government.
Mr. Lunderking, thank you very much. And I would just like to remind everyone following this session that after we end the parts about the presentations from each one of the panelists, we'll have a Q&A. So if there are any questions or comments by anyone about anything they've heard from any of the participants in this session, we'll try to put those issues forth to the relevant speaker. I turn over now to Ms. Tess Davis. Ms. Tess Davis, you have about 10 minutes. Can you talk a little bit about this beaten track that Mr. Lunderking referred to earlier, that has taken you to Yemen and its antiquities? Describe what it's like and describe where it took you.
Yes, sir. And first of all, thank you so much to you and to the National Council on U.S. Arab Relations, Mr. Roosevelt, and all the speakers today for your work on this critical topic. As an organization dedicated to stopping the black market and cultural heritage, we are honored to join this important event, and we truly do commend both our governments, Yemen and the United States, for this leadership, for their leadership on this issue. Again, my name is Tess Davis, and I'm Executive Director of the Antiquities Coalition, and we are a group of business leaders, former government officials, archaeologists, lawyers, and others who are committed to preserving our shared heritage. And in this mission, we join forces with a wide range of partners, including government, law enforcement, intergovernmental organizations, art market leaders, and museums. And as we've heard from the distinguished speakers so far, despite some hard-won successes, looting and trafficking continue to threaten the world's cultural heritage while also funding crime, conflict, and even terrorism. And while no corner of the world is spared, we certainly have a thriving looting and trafficking problem here in the United States. Yemen and the broader Middle East is under particular attack. And over the last decade, following the Houthi coup in particular, as we all know, Yemen has suffered one of the world's largest humanitarian crises. And this has put both its civilian population and their rich cultural heritage and artifacts at risk due to looting, smuggling, and the intentional destruction of sites. Culture has become a weapon of war. It's also become a criminal, insurgent, and terrorist financing tool. And for years now, experts have been warning that groups like Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula and the Houthi militias were and are arming themselves through the plunder and sale of the country's ancient treasures. And these reports have also long been corroborated by international experts, including archaeologists on the ground, groups like the International Council of Museums, and various groups within the United Nations framework. Yet for too long, the United States, which is the world's largest art market, we make up about half of the global total, remained wide open to these so-called blood antiquities. And so in the midst of this crisis, while dealing with the untold challenges, to their credit, both our government and the government of Yemen prioritized closing off this black market, proving once again the importance of culture to a nation's identity and history, and how its preservation during times of conflict can provide a sense of continuity and hope for the future. And so, as we've heard a little bit from the ambassador today, to make use of the international protections available, Yemen really performed a series of Herculean feats starting in 2019. And this included ratifying the main international treaty on the illicit trade in cultural property, the 1970 UNESCO Convention. And the government then embarked on the complex process established by our law, by U.S. law and regulations to prevent stolen cultural heritage from entering our markets, which resulted first in these emergency import restrictions and most recently in a bilateral cultural property agreement. Yemen has also been closely partnering with U.S. law enforcement, I should say, around the world, and as previously mentioned, museums, which is resulting in the repatriation of artifacts. We get more good news about this, every month, sometimes every week, of major successes that they've been able to achieve. And this case of using close engagement with the United States government to fight antiquities trafficking can really serve as an example to other countries around the world. However, we also feel it shows that much still needs to be done, both here within the United States, again, the world's largest art market, and internationally. And so I just wanted to use the rest of my time today to share a few recommendations that we think can have a significant impact. First, and this is something that that Yemen and the U.S. have certainly done in this area, is to continue to recognize the illicit trade as a serious crime. Our world's leading intergovernmental agencies, the UN Security Council, the G20, NATO, most recently, you name it, they have all been warning that cultural racketeering is a threat to international peace and security. We need to continue sending this message that looting and trafficking are not white-collar, victimless crimes. They're impacting global security. They're impacting global economies, legitimate markets, public institutions like museums, and most importantly, the local communities who are suffering these thefts firsthand. Second, there's still a lot we can do to strengthen the legal framework. The main international treaty on this issue, the 1970 UNESCO Convention, was a watershed, but it was created to combat the illicit trade as it existed half a century ago now. Its drafters could not have envisioned the internet, instantaneous money transfers, Facebook, global direct shipping, the list goes on. And moreover, and perhaps most importantly, the treaty does not, nor was it meant to, create criminal penalties or law enforcement tools. But we have these and other existing instruments, and better use of, say, the criminal treaties that are out there could complement the work of groups like UNESCO. And at the national level, there's likewise a great need to study, harmonize, and update our domestic laws of all countries around the world, while providing much needed training to legislative drafters, attorneys, and judges. This is something I know the State Department is supporting throughout the Middle East and North Africa. It's something we need to do here at home as well. And just to continue taking better advantage of the existing tools that are out there to combat fraud, money laundering, sanctions evasion, and terrorist financing, crimes that so often go hand in hand with this antiquities trafficking. Third, and related to the above, follow the money. Too much of our efforts, and by our, I mean everyone, governments, the international community, civil society, and the arts and culture, we have all been so focused on identifying looted and stolen art and bringing it home, which are hugely important goals. But to criminals, returning these items are often a cost of doing business. We have to treat these crimes as the crimes that they are, combat them as crimes. And thankfully, we're seeing a big shift towards this from the United States Federal Bureau of Investigation, from Homeland Security investigations, and from the Department of Justice. And it's having a major impact. For example, in 2023, there was a groundbreaking indictment against a Hezbollah financier who had laundered $160 million through the United States using fine art and other luxury goods. And cases like this show the importance of tackling this issue from a criminal perspective. Fourth, and building from that, foster a whole of government approach and build political will. Cultural racketeering, this is not a preservation failure. It's a failure of governance, law enforcement, civil society, and markets. And it can't be solved by archaeology. And I say this as an archaeologist myself. It can only be solved by strengthening law enforcement, international cooperation, and market integrity. And one of many reasons that Yemen has been so successful in fighting this crime is that the political will was there, the whole of government approach was there. It had strong leadership, both from its embassy in Washington as well as from its foreign ministry. In short, this is not something that ministries of culture should bear alone. We need all aspects of government engaged on this issue. And fifth, and most importantly, we must keep in mind that attacks against heritage are meant first and foremost as attacks against people. This is truly about people. It's not about stones or objects. Once you destroy all that a people hold sacred, the next step is always to destroy the people themselves. And that is why these cultural crimes can be atrocity crimes in and of themselves. And while they're also warning signs of impending crimes against humanity, war crimes, and even genocide. So elevating this issue within governments is important, not only in the interest of preservation, but to also support our international partners and allies, lay a solid foundation for post-conflict peace and reconciliation, and again, to cut off a lucrative and untraceable funding source for bad actors, conflict, crime, and terrorism. So these are just a few of the recommendations to consider, and thank you for your time.
Thanks very much, Ms. Davis. Mr. Dr. Jeremy Shitikati, you've heard what Ms. Davis said. You've heard what Mr. Lender King said before her. You heard what Ambassador Hadrami said before them. Talk a little bit, and you have 10 minutes also, about the crossroads of what you do and what they do.
Yeah, well, thank you very much for inviting me to this exciting event and panel, and it's my pleasure to discuss the Yemeni heritage. What I would like to do is to provide some images to the audience to set a bit of a context of what we are talking about in terms of archaeological heritage, and also about the challenges that we are now facing. So the ancient Yemen was the home for a flourishing culture, the South Arabian culture. I'm just sharing my screen. I hope you all see that. So the ancient Yemen was the home to the flourishing South Arabian culture, which owes its existence to the mastery of irrigated agriculture. And the floodwaters were diverted by monumental structures in scale, such as the Mareb Dam. It was really huge. It's 700 meters wide, 20 meters high. And because abundant water is available in Yemen and was available by the past, it favored agriculture. And South Arabia was mainly populated by sedentary people. Fortified towns appeared in Yemen as early as the 10th century BCE, as in this example, for example, in Marrakesh. So this civilization is characterized by several features. Monumental architecture, for example. This is illustrated by the temple Baran in Mareb, the capital city of the ancient kingdom of Saba, which is well known for this historical figure of the Queen of Saba, or the Queen of Sheba. Another characteristic of this civilization or culture is its artistic production that we are talking about. When we are talking about trafficking, looting, this is these kind of artifacts which are easily recognizable because fairly homogeneous, but this did not prevent the penetration of foreign artistic influences in Yemen. And even more than its iconography, what most characterizes this South Arabian culture is the script common to the entire region, which came into widespread use from the beginning of the first millennium BC, and which lasted for more than a millennium and a half. And now, what we talked about is also that for more than 20 years now, this archaeological heritage has been facing several challenges, in substance looting, but also destructions connected to war, destructions connected to ideology. And for example, Yemen has been at war since 2014 now, and from a civil war, the conflict became internationalized from 2015 onwards. And the consequence of this conflict was first on the heritage aerial bombing, which caused the most destruction. You have an example here on the ancient Mareb Dam. There are other examples. For example, on the temple in Marrakesh, these two photos were taken from almost the same angle. On the left, you can see a temple which had been patiently restored by an Italian archaeological mission. And on the right, you can see the result after the temple was shelled several times in 2015 and 16. In addition to archaeological sites, several museums were also shelled in Aden, Taiz, or on this example in Damar, where the museum and its collection have been wiped out. So that's the first point, destruction connected to the war. The second scourge is the ideologically driven destructions carried out by extremist groups, such as Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, Ansar al-Sharia, or Salafist militias. And to show you just a few examples of that, there are some destruction predating the armed conflict. For example, the ransacking of the just completed Zinjibar Museum in the Abian province, 2011. But most of the destructions took place during the recent conflict. And this is the case, for example, of mausoleums destroyed around the town of Mukalla by Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. And to complete this rapid overview, I would like to focus on a third scourge that has been increasingly affecting Yemen's heritage for more than 30 years: the looting, pillaging of its archaeological sites. And there is a specific region particularly affected by this. This is the central part of Yemen, notably because most of it largely escaped central government control, and because this is where the most significant archaeological sites are located as well. And I will just show you one of the several cases for the central region, the Wadi al-Jawf, where there are several ancient cities surrounded by city walls. And this is the first example, the site of Es-Sauda, ancient Nashan. On this satellite image, 2013, you can see in the central part, the city with its ramparts, and you can see that the intramuros area is riddled with looting pits. We can also see outside of the walls a smaller area peppered with looting pits. This is most probably the ancient cemetery. And we can follow year after year on satellite images the expansion of this looting, which spread around the cemetery. It stopped in 2016 because at that time the site was right on the front line, which marked the end of its looting. We don't have any picture before 2013 aerial satellite images, but we do know that the looting began much earlier, since it was already visible when I visited the site in 2004. If we look at another site just 15 kilometers away, site of Ma'in, it's an important ancient city. It was the capital city of a South Arabian kingdom, and this site suffered the same fate. On this picture from 2003, it already shows the presence of a lot of looting pits inside the city walls. Between 2003 and 2005, there was intensive looting of an area outside the city walls, which can still be interpreted as the city's cemetery. And this looting continued less intensively until 2011, when it seems to have stopped, probably because the limits of this cemetery has been reached. So what we see following these years of looting is something which is clearly connected to that. One of the characteristics of the ancient tombs in these cemeteries in the Jov Valley is the systematic presence in each of them of an anthropomorphic stele commemorating the deceased. And unsurprisingly, following the massive looting of what I assume to be the cemeteries in Es-Sauda, in Ma'in, some of these stele began to appear in dubious contexts, such as auction, in galleries, in private collections, and at first a few of them, and then many more of them appeared on this market. What I show you on the screen is all the funerary stele from this specific context that I have personally appraised since 2006, either recovered by the National Museum in Sana'a or after seizures from customs, galleries, auction houses. So it's hundreds of them, specifically more than 600 of these stelae. And among the very large number of stelae offered for sale or acquired over the last 10 years, 3 in particular stand out because they belong to 3 kings of Maine. So that's something totally new for us. It's a big first, but there is, in that case, no reason to celebrate because we are touching on one of the major problems of looting, which is the loss of invaluable information about the context in which these objects were found. So what use are beautiful works of art if we know nothing of the context in which they were conceived and used, and without knowing the relationship they may have had with their architectural, natural, or social environment?
Dr. Jeremy, if you'll allow me, because I think you're at the end of your 10 minutes, but to allow you to elaborate a little bit more on these issues, I wanted to ask you a question now, and then we'll get into the present and the future of this issue with Ms. Davis and Mr. Lander King and Ambassador Hadrami. So looting and pillaging is an ancient human practice. How is what's going on now in terms of the looting of Yemen's heritage different from what happened in ancient Yemen? What is the difference in terms of the impact and implications for Yemen and Yemenis?
Well, the implication, there are several aspects. The first one is, as it has already been mentioned by Tess, the loss for the Yemeni people of part of its history. I mean, it's definitely lost. When you lose the context of a discovery, you lose the information about the history of that people. When you have the destruction of its monuments, it's just wiping out part of its history. That's the first point. The second one is the main difference of looting now compared, of course, I mean, tombs were looted for centuries and centuries because people were just looking for valuable items to sell them on the market. But now it has taken a kind of scale which is not totally different. I mean, we are talking about thousands of artifacts which are floating on the art market, which have been smuggled out of Yemen and which took the direction of Gulf countries, Europe, the US, to be sold on the art market, legally or illegally. And the scale is totally different compared to what could have been looting by the past. When I said maybe 100, 200 years ago, it's totally different.
Ambassador Hadrami, building on this, so obviously the heritage of Yemen, the heritage of any country, is a very, very, very important part of its existence. But how do you deal with the difficult equation in a country like Yemen, where there's war, where the priorities may be peace, food, and freedom from disease, rather than focusing Yemen's assets and attention on the preservation of its ancient antiquities? How do you deal with that equation?
Thank you for the question and for the enlightening presentations from Dr. Jeremy. You know, it's a delicate balance. You know, your priorities are set by the circumstances you find yourself in. And preserving lives and livelihoods is utmost priority for us right now. And to do this, we need to end the coup and restate state institutions. But at the same time, we can't just wait and do nothing elsewhere. You know, having different priorities doesn't mean just focusing on one. So yes, I mean, as Mr. Lander King says, we want peace. We want peace yesterday, not even today, but we unfortunately know after 10 years of war with the Houthis after the coup that military pressure is the only way for a peaceful solution. And having a peaceful solution where state institutions are actually there, it would not only solve the issues with our main priorities, which is saving the lives and livelihoods of people, it would also help Antiquities. It would also help eliminating some of the atrocities that Dr. Jeremy actually alluded to in terms of profiteering, the ideological component between those radical groups of Al-Qaeda, Daesh, and even the Houthis in terms of erasing our heritage and erasing our identity as Yemenis. And everybody has its motivation. So your question, how do we delicate this balance? We do whatever we can. For example, now we can't do much at the home front, but we're doing everything we can here at the United States. I know our colleagues in different embassies in Europe are doing the same in France and elsewhere. So we're trying to do what we can with what we have right now. And there's I think there was a question raised is with why would people destroy their heritage? It's really saddens me to see how ideology and radicalism really feeds into this narratives. You find the Houthis, you find Al-Qaeda, Daesh, everyone is doing it not just for profit, they're doing it for ideological reasons. I mean, let me just give you an example of the Houthis. The Houthis' main goal is to return Yemen to this divine right to rule era. Their legitimacy revolves around the mandate or al-wilaya, which means that the descendant of the Prophet is a religious way of ruling Yemen and having Yemeni identity preserved since antiquity, since before Islam, is not benefiting that narrative. So I think in the back mind of the Houthi, if they could just erase whatever the Ma'inis and Saba'is and the beautiful artifacts that we have that reminds us of the great civilizations of the Yemenis, of the Asians, they do it in a blink of an eye. And that feeds into how we could actually solve this. And I think the best thing to do, even to solve the question of the Red Sea, Gaza has to end. I mean, the atrocities in Gaza, for God's sake, with 34,000 people, mostly children and women, that needs to end. I think that would help everyone, including Yemen. And I think Israel needs to back off. And I think the leader of the free world needs to have a stronger stance in that venue. And at the same time, help the government of Yemen liberate their areas. We could get Hudaydah. I mean, I'm just trying to get to the point where priorities are many, but we could focus in reinstating the state institutions, and that would solve many of our priorities, not just the lives, but also antiquities.
Sure. I mean, the issue of ideology and the Houthi and the Red Sea and Gaza, we'll come to that in a little bit later, maybe with Mr. Lenderking as well. But I wanted to stay at this issue of this difficult equation. Is there a difference in terms of how you address it to an international audience? What you have just said now, that it's a delicate balance, but it has to be maintained, as opposed to talking to an ordinary Yemeni family with several kids who have lost their home, or members of the family being killed. They cannot feed the kids are sick. How do you explain to those this important initiative to actually save Yemeni heritage from losing?
I just remind them that if we lose track of who we are as Yemenis, if we lose track of our identity that is being stolen, I think we would not be able to weather and endure the hardships of today. So meaning that I would not be in a position as government to divert resources from saving lives, feeding people, getting help to alleviate the atrocities of the Houthis and what's happening in a humanitarian, to preventing profiteering from antiquities. I'm not in a position to do that. Paying salaries, stabilizing the economy, feeding people is the utmost priority. So I'm not going to divert resources from that today to preserve our heritage, but I could do everything I can which is partnering with the Antiquities Coalition, partnering with the U.S. Department, partnering with so many. I mean, we have signed a historic agreement with the State Department back in August 2023. And that memorandum of understanding is twofold. One, it would actually extend the import restrictions from 2 years to 5 years, which is good. But also there's a technical, in Article 2, a technical assistant clause would enable the State Department using so many programs to help Yemenis. I'm not going to pay for them. Hopefully the United States, through these magnificent programs, will help rehabilitate our museums, put them in the register, help us actually put more lists like we did with Antiquities Coalition. So in a sense, I would not divert my meager resources to save the Antiquities, but I would help and seek help from the United States, from Antiquities, to enable me to do both.
Mr. Lenderking, if I may ask you, based on that, what we've just heard from Ambassador Hadrami. So obviously, the internationally recognized government of Yemen accuses the Houthi of basically contributing to the destruction of Yemeni heritage, to looting it, to peddling it, and so on and so forth. We hear accusations also from the Houthi to the Yemeni government. We hear accusations to regional powers meddling in Yemen as having contributed to this state of affairs when it comes to dealing with Yemeni heritage. And then come Tim Lenderking, the US envoy. How do you continue to try to find peace in Yemen in order to safeguard Yemeni heritage in the middle of all these accusations and counter accusations and differences, political differences?
I think the main thing is to focus on the mandate that the president gave me, which was to try and support a political process and to work toward mitigating the humanitarian crisis in Yemen. And it's been described, I think Ms. Davis said that it is considered still one of the world's worst humanitarian crises. I mean, think of what else is happening in the world. Obviously, Gaza has been mentioned, and problems in a terrible situation of warfare in Sudan. There's Ukraine and the Russian aggression against Ukraine. So how do we keep Yemen? How do we keep donors focused on Yemen? The World Food Program and many organizations like that, NGOs, American NGOs, international NGOs, which employ a lot of Yemenis, are working inside Yemen and doing a phenomenal job. The International Committee for the Red Cross helps in so many ways. And they're out there on the ground, and they're helping Yemeni women, get access to the kind of resources that they need for their health and for the welfare of their children and families. There's many tremendous people who are involved in this effort in one way or the other. But I think having the administration in the very first, President Biden's very first speech, February 4th, 2020, at the State Department, say, we're going to work on Yemen. We're going to appoint an envoy. We're going to invest resources in this. I think it's paid off. It's just that it's not enough. And we're facing, tremendous problems in the region and challenges. And, we need the international community to continue to focus on Yemen, because Yemen actually, Yemen, though there's a long way to go, Yemen has a head start. If you look at some of the other crises, Yemen, there is this truce that is holding inside the country. We were able to get with the UN commercial flights out of Sana'a for the first time since 2016. We want eventually more flights to more destinations. That's not a travel ad or an ad for, a particular airlines. That helps Yemenis get medical care. That helps them reunite with their families and gives them a sense of relief from, the oppression of war over the last, 8 years. So these steps have real life consequences. They have real impact on on the Yemeni people, and we need to keep that focus on them, because I think what gets lost in the shuffle is the fact that Yemenis inside Yemen still don't have the proper access to medical care. They may have food in their areas, but with no salaries and essentially an economy that has suffered from 8 years of warfare, people don't have the purchasing power to buy food that gets brought into the country. And then you have, again, Houthi attacks on Red Sea shipping. And the way that hurts Yemenis, right? It's causing a decrease in commercial imports into Yemen. Ships are being diverted. It's more expensive for ships to get to Yemen because of insurance costs and the threats that are imposed on them. So this is not helping. And again, I come back to the point that, there is a crisis in Gaza. It's a terrible situation. We have to separate the two. One cannot say that, supporting solidarity and showing solidarity with Palestinians in Gaza does not justify the attacks on Red Sea shipping, which remains the single most impediment to moving a peace process forward. So we have a number of things, a number of challenges. We have good partners in the Yemen government. We have good, such as the ambassador and his leadership in Saudi Arabia, in Oman. We can, use, I think, the support of the region. There's not a single country in the immediate vicinity that wants to see Yemen return to war or get dragged back into conflict. So we have to use the tremendous support of the neighbors, who are heavily invested in seeing a good outcome here. And seeing Yemen, back on its feet, that's very important. That was a subject of Secretary Blinken's conversations with the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia on this very day in Riyadh. So using, I think, the commitment from the leadership and the partners that we have, and a deep desire among the Yemeni people to see this conflict ended. These are things that, and I would just say, we have the support of Russia and China as well. They're not in favor of they're not backing different horses. They're not supporting a return to conflict. So we have resources and assets to bring to this challenge. We have to continue to do it in a dedicated manner.
Thank you. Ms. Davis, I have a question and a follow-up question. The question is from Kate Fitzgibbon, the Committee for Cultural Policy, and she says, who, the State Department, the Smithsonian, independent archaeologists, historians, or the government of Yemen provided lists of types of items for inclusion in a designated list for import restrictions?
Sorry, I don't think I understood the question.
She's saying, who, is it the State Department, the Smithsonian, the independent archaeologists or historians, or the government of Yemen, who provides lists of types of items for inclusion in a designated list for import restrictions?
Perhaps our government representatives are better to answer this, but it's my understanding that it's a collaborative process between both governments in which they solicit outside input as necessary.
Okay, my follow-up question is, once you have actually received the lead on stolen artifacts as to their location, who or how physically, how do you physically go after the artifacts? What level of danger are these artifacts? What level of danger their retrieval involves for specialists?
Well, it varies very much from case to case, but unfortunately, we are finding illicit artifacts from Yemen, from countries like Ukraine, from post-conflict countries like Cambodia. They show up everywhere. They show up on the black market, and they also show up at the heights of, the legitimate art market in our museums, on our auction houses, on our galleries. And this illustrates the challenge in combating this trade, not just for governments, but for law enforcement specifically, and also for responsible art market participants, is that it is very difficult to know whether an item is looted or legal just by looking at it. It's a complex question that requires knowing its history and knowing its provenance. Agreements like the agreement that's been mentioned today seek to close off our markets to those illicit materials, making it easier, protecting consumers from accidentally buying this material and, unintentionally supporting something like the conflict in Yemen. But, we, as the ambassador mentioned, the Met has been very responsive in their conversations with Yemen. We've seen the same from museums as well. Unfortunately, this material does show up at the heights of the art market. That happens. What is important is what happens next, what collaboration follows from this, what steps the market takes to help to right these past wrongs. And this is where, too, I think Yemen is a very positive example, building strong relationships with the Smithsonian, with the Met. No responsible institution wants to have this material on display. And our hope is, and I think we're seeing this hope realized through Yemen and other countries like Cambodia, is that when these challenges do arise, when a museum, when an auction house, when a collector finds out that, accidentally, unintentionally, they are in possession of an object that has a dark history like this, that they view it not as an obstacle, but as an opportunity to build stronger relationships with these governments around the world. And we see, again, very positive examples of this, of museums, of other market actors, treating these not as obstacles, but as stepping stones to very positive relationships. We want I'm sure, while not speaking for the Republic of Yemen, I'm sure that, they want Americans to see their art, but in a responsible way. It's incredibly rich history. It's a history that we all want to see and to witness. And I think the importance of events like this, the importance of agreements like the bilateral agreement, is to make sure that, when we're seeing that art, appreciating it, it's in a way that can help benefit Yemen, not further destroy its heritage. So I think there's a lot of good examples. Unfortunately, there's still a lot of challenges to face as well, but it's through efforts like this, diplomatic cooperation, law enforcement cooperation, partnerships with the private sector, that can make a very big difference and are making a very big difference in this case.
So I wanted to ask you a question. I don't know if you are across all the nitty-gritty of it, but I'll ask it anyway. So once you've identified the location of a stolen artifact, once you've identified the owner of the stolen artifact, whether that owner is an individual or an institution, and you have actually retrieved it, you've seized it, with the intention to return it to its rightful owner. Are there legal, criminal consequences to the individual or the institution that had the stolen artifact, or no?
There can be. Again, it very much depends on the circumstances. But and the important thing about the bilateral agreement and the import restrictions is that, in simplest terms, and again, this is an oversimplification, but it switches the burden of proof. And that bringing this material into the United States, if you're bringing it in, you have to show it's legal. Whereas usually it's the opposite, that a country like Yemen or Egypt or Italy, or even, the United States operating elsewhere, has to come with the evidence that something was stolen. Think of how difficult that is in a situation of the looting of archaeological resources, where the thief is likely the first person to have even seen this material in hundreds and even thousands of years. And so, again, the agreements are important for stopping that at the border, because borders are our best chance of getting this material back and getting it home. Once it is in once it is in the United States, so for pieces that, say, predate the agreement, there are a variety of different tools that can be used. One that law enforcement relies very heavily on is what's called the National Stolen Property Act. On its face, it has nothing to do with cultural heritage. I believe its origin was actually in the Bonnie and Clyde era, to give the federal government a federal theft statute as they started to see, theft and crossing state borders. But it has been applied to cultural heritage in recognizing that a country, be it the Republic of Yemen or an individual claimant, say descendants of Holocaust victims, that this is stolen property. In the United States, the continuing possession of stolen property can be a crime. So there are legal tools that our government can use and is using, but these cases are difficult. It's a very high burden of proof. And often the people who might be doing bad behavior are often wealthy individuals. We've seen this in some cases in New York in particular. And so, again, these agreements are important because it hopefully will prevent the need for applying these criminal laws in the future by keeping this material out of the country to begin with, protecting not only cultural heritage, but also, again, protecting the responsible consumers out there.
Ambassador Hadrami, if I may, one point that we've just heard from Ms. Davis is that the American public has the right to see Yemeni cultural heritage in various museums in the United States. But she said it has to be done the right way. Now, you and I are both from the Arab world. We know the depth of popular feeling about stuff that was stolen during the colonial era and is now, in London or Paris or Rome or whatever. How difficult is it under the current circumstances in Yemen to say we have actually saved this number of Yemeni artifacts because the situation in Yemen does not allow the return of those artifacts to Yemen? We got to keep them in the United States until further notice. How much of a difficult process is that for you as a government?
No, thank you. I think we need to look at it from different perspectives. I hear you. I understand that. And I think Dr. Jeremy alluded a bit of it. Without having context of this item, there is no story, there is no history of it. And the best context of it is to return it to the environment that it was found. So it could be studied, it could be appreciated, and it could actually reveal the story behind it and behind the people who actually owned it. And that's the narrative that we want out of any piece. So in that term, yes, all items in Yemen and elsewhere needs to be returned to their home, because not just because we're the rightful owners of them, it's just because when you bring them back home, you bring them back to context, and then they'll be more valuable to us and to the world. But at the same time, and I agree with Tess, we need to share our heritage too. And I think we're in a dilemma now because of the conflict in Yemen, because of the coup in Yemen. So we have decided in the government that it's best to keep it here, safe keeping it here on loan until everything is fine and then we can return it back. But at the same time, I wouldn't mind and I wouldn't rule out in the future, even when it's peacetime, that Yemen would voluntarily share some of its heritage, not to give it away, but to have tours of our magnificence. For example, we haven't discovered so many things in Queen Sheba Temple. And we're now actually discussing with the man in the future that we need new narratives. We need to discover new stories of the hidden civilizations in Yemen. And we can't do this with all our stuff stuck back home without this. So once we establish the context, we wouldn't mind having a partnership between these leading cultural institutions and the people of Yemen or the people of any other civilizations. My issue is the partners, as I see them in the previous decades, established between billionaires and collectors and museums, not between the people of that owns that culture and the museums themselves. So the issue is not where the art is located. The issue is who actually brought it there. If you rely on collectors, that would just feed in the ugly machine back home of profiteering and stealing for the profit or for ideological reasons. And then it will just get the names of the collectors and the big, in museum. But if we establish, like we did with the Metropolitan and the Smithsonian, a partnership between the people of Yemen and those institutions, we wouldn't mind or rule out in the future lending some of our artifacts to be displayed and then returned back to Yemen. I think that's a good perspective. And I think a lot of people in Yemen would appreciate it, because we want other people to know the stories of Yemen. We want other people to appreciate how diverse and how ancient and the civilizations of Yemen from antiquities since the first and the second millennium BC.
So, if I may ask a follow-up question. So, obviously, the United States does not see itself as a colonial power. In the region, it is seen as an empire, but it doesn't have a colonial history in the way that the British or the French do. In terms of optics, does it matter whether the artifacts, the Yemeni artifacts, are kept in the United States or in London or Paris?
I'm not sure. I think I would need to deal with it in a case-by-case basis. What exactly is that? For example, if now we have discovered something and we are in the process of retrieving something in France, we haven't gone through the process as we did in the United States. It's still between the embassy and the authorities, as I believe. If we reach an agreement similar to the agreement with the Smithsonian, with the Louvre, I would think a lot of people in Yemen would appreciate it for now. But I think as soon as we have peace in Yemen, some certain areas would be a bit not as sensitive, more sensitive than the United States. But the whole concept of once we have war now, I think we would be willing to keep our artifact under loan agreements in any of the museums, whether it's in Europe or in the United States. And that's actually the template that the government of Yemen is trying to work with. We have hundreds, if not even thousands, of artifacts that are stolen. And there is actually an information that I got from Tess when we talked before, that when we have issues now, like there's hundreds and thousands of artifacts that are stolen, you will not actually be seeing them today or tomorrow or next year. I mean, they would probably show up in a decade or so. You know, some of the artifacts that were stolen and returned to Yemen from New York were actually apprehended back in 2009 and 2010. And now we're seeing some who are actually coming in. So meaning, you know, the things that you do now reflects the atrocities that happened way back. And I'm afraid that in the future, we would start to see the magnitude of what's happening now during this 10 years and that we haven't even seen. So we're trying to establish these connections with these museums. So in the future, if there's an item showing from a private collector after years of being hidden, people would know that is stolen from Yemen. And that's why we need these agreements. That's why we need these lists. And, you know, just to answer one of the questions very quickly, you know, the import restrictions doesn't have a specific list. It's an import restrictions on all things that come from Yemen without proving the provenance, you know, without having a legitimate claim to this item would be stopped. And that's the beauty of having this agreements, bilateral agreements between us and the United States. So it doesn't have to be specified in the list. We have a list and we would actually produce a list as part of the agreement. But in general, anything Asian that comes from Yemen, you cannot get it in the United States as if now without actually proving how you got it. And that's the beauty of that agreement.
Ms. Davis, if I may very quickly come back to you, what's your take on this issue of where the location ought to be of a retrieved artifact?
Well, first of all, of course, this is a question out to the communities involved, but I think it's important to highlight that we're talking about antiquities here, pieces that are centuries and in Yemen's case, millennia old. And we don't have to look too long ago for the fact that it was the collections not in Yemen, but in London and Paris and Berlin that were at risk of being destroyed by armed conflict. You know, these pieces have long histories. Our history here is not that long. And, you know, and for example, my grandparents' generation, it was St. Paul's Cathedral in London that was at risk of being destroyed. And so we have no idea where the next conflict will be. And things can change very quickly. A lot of my work has been in the Kingdom of Cambodia, which, of course, in a generation ago was the site of the worst global conflict at the time. Today, Cambodia is at peace. New generations are growing up in peace and prosperity. Refugees are returning home, and looted antiquities are returning home. And there's a very bright future ahead. And I think we can all hope that the same will be becoming true of Yemen, that the situation will be very different in the future. And these items, like the Yemeni people who have fled the conflict, will be returning home and making that whole. So just to stress that, again, we can't see into the future, but it was not that long ago that it was American and Western Europe that was at risk of this destruction. I think it's very important we not forget that.
Dr. Jeremy, you mentioned at the outset of this conversation the destruction of artifacts in Yemen by Al-Qaeda. There's been destruction by Al-Houthi. There's been destruction by government forces. So the story goes for these three players. Does it matter at the end of the day who does the destruction of these artifacts, whether it's a government or a terror organization?
Yeah, of course it matters, because it's a question of accountability and understanding also the reasons for these destructions. I mean, when we are talking about the destruction of mausoleums, it's clearly by extremist groups who have a certain reading and interpretation of what Islam is. And for certain groups, extreme groups, religious figures should not be commemorated. You cannot also, in the most extreme interpretations also, they emphasize that idolatry or polytheism should not be considered or venerated, and it includes archaeological sites. So in the fundamental principles of these most extreme interpretations emphasize the destruction of potential sites of idolatry or polytheism. And when you are facing these groups, it has some consequences on the heritage, on the archaeological practices. So it's very important to understand the reason behind the will to destroy an archaeological site or to destroy mausoleums. And then it's a way of negotiation to preserve this heritage, or confrontation. As I said, accountability. If you look at what happened in Timbuktu, people have been convicted for these destructions afterwards. So yes, it matters to know who is performing these destructions. And then in a year or 10 years from now, there can be some consequences on that.
But the issue is that for the substance of the interest of Yemen and the Yemenis and their future, I guess the question I'm asking, does it matter whether the party that destroys the artifacts is a terror organization or a government that builds a military base, at an archaeological site, or an army that bombs that archaeological site from the air? Does the how make a difference for Yemenis and their future?
In the end, this is most probably for the Yemenis. I cannot talk for Yemenis. I'm not a Yemeni by myself, but I can suppose that in the end, the consequence is the same. This is the loss of their heritage, their history, and there is no coming back on that. So maybe it doesn't matter really who performed these destructions. But there was, at a certain period of time, 2015 and 16, some bombings which have been interpreted by part of the population as a will by an external power to wipe out part of their history. So it was a way to see, a way to interpret some destructions, heritage destructions, as something performed willingly for a specific purpose in the frame of a war, which was destroying their past. That's an interpretation that some of my Yemeni friends and colleagues had. I cannot say if it was a widespread way of seeing these destructions, but it's very, very difficult to speak for the Yemeni people.
Okay. Mr. Landeking, probably end with you, which we only have a few minutes left. If I may prevail upon you and ask you to condense your question to your answer to my next question. I mean, the United States, with all the efforts that you say the United States is making to achieve peace and preserve Yemeni cultural heritage, is the administration doing that because Americans are interested in Yemeni cultural heritage, or it's doing it for purely political reasons because the politics of the Democratic Party want the achievement of peace and the saving of Yemeni artifacts?
I think that there's a genuine humanitarian attraction to the Yemen conflict that many Americans feel, because we are, and that's reflected in the fact that we have been over the last year and very often the leading donor in terms of funding for humanitarian work in Yemen. More than $5 billion, that's American taxpayer money, going to provide some measure of relief for the Yemeni people. And I think there was just a lot of concern as this administration took leadership after the previous election, that maybe there was a moment with a little bit of a push for Yemen to escape from further conflict. And I think things sort of hang in the balance. There has been progress, as I've noted, but there is a long way to go. And there are huge pressures on Yemen from Iran, and I think even from the Houthis, to question what the way forward is. What I think we've been able to do is develop an international consensus and use international coalitions to put pressure on Yemen to end the conflict in a positive way and to demonstrate concrete results. Working with the UN envoy as well, and of course the Yemen government here. At the end of the day, the parties inside that have been fighting across political lines in Yemen have got to sit down at the table and make their way forward. And that's the moment I think that we really look forward to, and that I'm confident we can get there. But we have to keep highlighting, I think, the importance of Yemen. And again, a seminar like this with experts and dedicated people and activists who know Yemen from a different angle, yourself included, Abdurrahim. Thank you for tremendous work you're doing and taking an interest in this topic. And Kusar as well. I mean, this is excellent, but it shows Yemen in its totality and what it brings to the table as a civilization, as a country in the region, and why it's worth the international community fighting for these things. Thank you very much.
Great words to end this conversation with. Thank you, Mr. Timothy Landeking, the U.S. envoy to Yemen. Thank you also to His Excellency Ambassador Mohammed Al-Hadrami, the Ambassador of the Republic of Yemen to the United States. Thank you to Ms. Tess Davis, Executive Director of the Antiquities Coalition, and to Dr. Jeremy Shitakati, the Research Fellow, French National Center for Scientific Research and Visiting Research Scholar at the New York University Institute for the Study of the Ancient World. It's been my absolute privilege to moderate this very important conversation. And now I hand it back over to Mr. Roosevelt, the president of NCUSAR.
Wow, there's just so much information that has come out from this last hour and a half. I'm glad that we will have it up on our YouTube channel so we can all rewatch it again and absorb what was shared. It was absolutely splendid. I want to thank you all, as it goes without saying, but I need to. And I also, a special thank you to Dr. Abdulrahim, Bureau Chief of Al Jazeera. Your style and grace in the way that you conduct these is unsurpassed. You are definitely in the position that you were born to be in. And I thank you for that. Thank you all for participating. And I hope that you will all consider being our guest at our 41st gala event and policymakers conference coming up on November 12 and 13. Inshallah, we will all be able to get together then and share good stories about what's happened between now and November of this year. And to all of the viewers, thank you for participating in this conversation. Without you, we would just be chatting among ourselves. So thank you all very much for your participation. Again, to all of you, the staff at National Council, I couldn't do this without you. I cherish you. Thank you all, and may God bless. Thank you.